Valentine, who will be hosting the panel. So take it away, Rebecca.
Thank you so much, Chris. Yes, I'm Rebecca Valentine. I'm a senior staff writer with GamesIndustry.biz. I'm going to be moderating this wonderful group of people for the next 45 minutes. We have some kind of set questions that we're going to talk about, some discussion topics that came up in some of the presentations earlier. And we also have a few questions that were submitted earlier that we're going to try to get to. And if anyone else has any questions for any of the people in here, please feel free to drop them in the chat. We'll take a look and we will see if we can't get them answered. So I'm happy to introduce this panel. We have Stanley Pierre-Louis from the ESA. I'm trying to go in order around the boxes. We have Eduardo Mena from Ipsos Mori. We have Sam Naji from GSD and B2 Boost. We have next box. We have Natasha Amboji from GSD and B2 Boost. Candice Murdoch from Newzoo. And Alex Champlin from Nico Partners. Oh, and the last box is Chris. So yeah, I want to start by, we heard in a lot of the presentations earlier today about all the different impacts of COVID-19 on the games business, just from all kinds of different angles. So I'd like to start by talking about that, kind of broadly. Is there anything that can be inferred about the longer term effects of the pandemic on games, both in terms of how people play them as well as how they spend money on them?
Who wants to go first?
Whoever wants to
go. Raise your hands.
Yeah, I know. I mean, like, sure. Yeah, I think a lot of the behavior that we're seeing now, or at least from our perspective, is that COVID is accelerating trends that we've been seeing in the games industry, although not necessarily changing them. One of the trends that we did notice that has gotten an increase from talking to our cloud gaming partners is that the interest in cloud gaming did go up during the pandemic, which we have been believing is a longer term thing that will happen, that cloud gaming will become a pillar in addition to PC, console, mobile. But I think the rate at which it has been adopted, or the rate at which consumers are expressing interest in this did accelerate as a result of COVID.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with you. I think absolutely within GameTrack and the research that we have seen, what we have seen is the acceleration of the process of digitalization. And actually something that is within the gaming environment is the virtualization, if we can say that, like creating these virtual spaces where gamers jump in and instead of playing, they share experiences, talk to them, to their friends. And actually right now it's kind of a channel of new content where they can access and join and actually have that touch with their friends and relatives in these cases. So I think it's just the full acceleration that we have seen in these 2 months, something that we were looking in a more longer pace or period.
Yeah, this is Stan. What we've been seeing is that more people want to play and play together, and that's increased the number of people who want to play. Parents have begun playing with their kids, and so many are being introduced to games that they weren't playing. Also, a lot of catalog sales because people were getting ready for being at home, and there's a lot of excitement about the games to come. So there's been this surge, and there's probably going to be a pretty decent tail at the end of it when new games and consoles come out. But the extent of which that might be is unclear. But what's clear is a lot of new fans have entered the game sphere on top of the engagement that's occurred.
We've found a significant, I talked about this earlier, the significant increase in streaming engagement and, kind of counterintuitively, the esports industry has been, rocked in terms of their ability to hold in-person events. But what this has done is really pushed the industry forward in terms of, developing an online audience, developing more participation around esports in terms of just regular people kind of getting into streaming and producing content. I mean, we saw a significant increase in viewership and in the production of live streams across Asia. And there's no sign that that's gonna fall off after the sort of the pandemic is lifted. So it seems like it's something that's it's now going to be the state of that part of the industry.
At GSD, we have seen, of course, a surge of sales, especially on digital games and hardware. People have equipped massively in hardware during the lockdown period. There has been also drastic changes in terms of distribution because a lot of shops were closed. But what is interesting in terms of structure of distribution is that as soon as the shops have reopened, we have seen the return to normal in terms of people going back to the shops and buying physical games. So that was interesting. The market has gained new gamers, and especially women. And what this period has shown also is, of course, that video games was an easy entertainment during that period, and it offers possibility for people to entertain, escape from their day-to-day life, which was rather stressing at that moment, at that period. And it also offers them a chance to socialize and to have social interactions with their relatives and friends. And I think this is a major, this is a trend that will last in the long term.
Sam, did you want to add anything?
I think basically one of the key things is, sorry, did you say
No,
Ed or? Okay, sorry, apologies.
I said Sam, but go ahead, please.
No, sorry, some people call me Ed, so I just jump immediately.
Sorry.
No, I think is something like we have just the engagement, and it's basically something that it has accelerated the engagement. But right now, the main question is, as the progress of lockdown just is, will that engagement settle at that high level, or actually will it start decreasing and coming down? And that's something that we have actually researched at Ipsos. And particularly, we have as like not only content, like gaming content, but other types of content. Basically, as one of the key points I want to say, like gaming is video games is very sticky content. When you try it, it's your first time, or you are coming back to it, such as lapse gamers coming back to discover and rediscover the old games and starting to discover new games and start investing time and money into the medium. Well, actually, there's planning for a medium term maintain of this curve in terms of incidents, but actually in engagement. And yes, so basically, like I will expect the video game just to keep holding up, but also discovering like there is still room to grow, even with the current generation, and hopefully it will empower the newest generation that is coming towards the end of the year.
My 2 cents. I'm just going to reiterate what Natasha said. What we found was that there was a large increase in regards to digital spending, but now that the lockdown has finished in most communities and people are going back to a relatively new normal life and the retail stores are opening up, we are finding that the situation is going back to normal in regards to market shares between retail stores and digital downloads before the lockdown situation. So there was definitely a spike when the lockdown happened in favor for network, where people kind of had no choice in some cases. But at the moment, we are beginning to see a new normal, which is very much like the old normal.
DJ Solid in the chat, I think that probably just answered your question, but in case it didn't, please let me know and I'll make sure that that gets to them too. To kind of continue talking about COVID a little bit, have you seen any significant changes to how games are monetizing themselves that have manifested due to the pandemic? And if so, do you see those changes sticking around for the long term?
Anecdotally, no, I haven't seen any change.
Interesting.
Yeah, like specifically as a result of COVID, I would say not necessarily. In general, what we've seen in monetization trends has been kind of a convergence. So there's been a bit of a convergence on the mobile side where like casual is monetizing now more and more like how core games monetize, and we've seen platforms learn from each other. So the Battle Pass on PC and console has now been brought to mobile. So I would say that there's a lot of convergence in learning from the different platforms, but nothing specifically new as a result of COVID, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think it's more in terms of behaviors of the gamers. Like, for example, in the UK, like 30% of the player population say that they start playing another device within the last month or the last couple of months. So it means that if I used to play on my console all the time, because I had more time, I just started jumping to play up on my smart device, and I just came back to my old PC games. So that actually creates a higher level of engagement. But in terms of how these games could have been monetized individually, is not any particular change. I think the largest change that is in it just the creation of these virtual environments where actually more content can be pushed to this player base, and content that is appealing to them. Like, I mean, we had examples like Fortnite and this massive concert. You couldn't go to a live concert, but opening up that window within the game for another extra content and share with your friends and enjoying a nice piece of music, whatever the artist is just creating that extra level or extra layer within the video game industry. And also like playing movies within games environment. I think that could actually open a new door, an opportunity for the gaming companies to engage further with their audience.
Yeah, you also saw in terms of consumer behavior, you saw tremendous interest in the Nintendo Switch and in their new games, particularly Animal Crossing. And so, those repercussions will be going for a while. More people want to play those games, some because of the nature of family-focused games, and some because it's a very portable console, and you can play powerful games on the go or on the big screen. And so it gives you lots of flexibility. It'll be interesting to see what comes down the pike later in the year, whether you're talking about new games, but also what the new consoles offer, what the new Xbox model is going to look like for Game Pass. So there may be future models for games as a service that may be interesting for consumers. So I think there's going to be some experimentation to see what works and what keeps it sticky.
I would add, and this isn't reducible to a COVID impact, but what we've been seeing in Asia is a slight increase in buy-to-play models, particularly around the Steam platform. And so historically, that's been a very kind of weak market, but it's growing, and so that's just an interesting tidbit. But again, not reducible just to sort of to COVID effects, but perhaps impacted by it.
So DJ Solid, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, yeah. I wanted to add to what Sam had said, what we have seen during this period that can be pointed out. There were a lot of promotions during that period, especially on the digital storefronts. And there was a big reactivity of the gamers to these promotions. And the other important thing I wanted to point out is that the success of big releases hasn't changed because of COVID. And if the market is, if publishers are launching big games, big releases, there still will be gamers to buy these games, even with the restrictions and so on. So we have seen a very big success of Animal Crossing, which was released just, for example, in France, the week of the lockdown. And in spite of that, or because of the lockdown, or we don't know if it was dependent or not, but it was a very big success. Very big start. Yes, for this game.
So DJ Solid and chat did expand on their question, so I'll give you both parts of it. They originally said, from a professional point of view, I think that this is a great opportunity for growth in the industry. Do you share that thought, or do you see obstacles in the coming year or so due to COVID? And then they expanded on that and said, I am also thinking about new norms in the industry because companies, not only developers, might be willing to transition to a more work from home logic. Is there any merit in that?
So I can talk about, so we did a recent industry survey to ask our clients and game publishers and developers the impact of COVID on their own work process. And, does this open up an opportunity? Like you said, I think in general, yes, this opens up opportunities because there's more people playing and engaging with games than ever before. But on the other hand, internally, what we've seen is that there has been disruptions to game publishers and developers themselves from a process standpoint. So there's been cancellations and delays reported by over 50% of the people that we have surveyed, and there have also been a lot of the smaller companies that have reported also challenges with funding. So on the one hand, I think the opportunities is probably a lot of it will maybe go more towards the bigger guys, unfortunately. And I do see that maybe some of the smaller companies right now are getting a little bit squeezed because of yeah, the fact that game events aren't happening, and that's usually where like a lot of these funding discussions and discoveries happens. So I think it really depends like where or what kind of stakeholder you are. But yeah, 2 cents.
I think with respect to work from home, there are some functions I think a lot of video game companies are finding are very doable from home, and then there are others that require collaboration, symphonic playing for scores, motion capture, and then some of the ideation within games. And I think they're all looking to ensure that there's health and safety for the developers, the folks who are making the games. And I think that's going to be the probably toughest thing to figure out, is how you help in terms of the collaborative portions. But I think there's a preference to work from the office, but I think there's an openness now that a lot of companies, not just video game companies, are seeing because of the productivity that they have. But there is something about being together. We talked about events, and we talk even about being able to convene on a panel like this in person. There is a human instinct to want to connect and to want to have the side conversation in the hallway and get someone from not looking at their computer while they're at one of these events. And so I think there's a yearning to convene, and I think that helps the workplace. But I think there will be an openness now for some functions not to have to be in a central place. And I think that's going to affect economies in lots of different ways, but may also impact productivity in positive ways.
I think I'd like to just pick up from that. If we are going into the 2021 period, 2022 period with fewer games, what we might see as a result of that is that when games do come out, they're going to generate more unit sales than we've seen previously, only because there's fewer choice. So, for example, as of late, we've seen several games coming out that have broken records for the PlayStation and for the Switch. And we may actually see even more records being broken in the near future, simply because of the fewer titles, there's less choice. And so when a good game does come out, it will sell more units. So possibly we could see fewer but bigger games coming out in the near future until the whole situation just goes back to normal.
Yeah, we at Newsy, we also expect there to be fewer titles, or at least there to be delays to what has already been announced. So in line with what you're saying.
Interesting. That Eric Hall over in the chat transitions us quite nicely into a conversation about next-gen hardware, asking, will high price points for next-gen hardware, in addition to a recession, further influence game delays, with publishers withholding for a more ideal launch? And recognizing that we don't have price points for next-gen consoles yet, if those price points are on the higher side. Sam's laughing.
So historically, games have always done well during a recession, and we did during my presentation kind of looked back and analyzed like the current generation hardware sales and kind of how it impacted software sales, and it is challenging to look backward and say like this is definitely going to happen for the next gen, because there is a recession looming. Like there was the big announcement on the US GDP recently, and the thing is that there's factors in both directions, right? Like we expect that the console price point will probably be in the $500 to $600 range, and at the same time, a company like Microsoft might have or be willing to take more of an upfront loss because they can't afford to, just to get more people into their ecosystem. And people might see games, even though they're being squeezed and rent in these other ways, they might see games as still an affordable option when you look at the entertainment hours per dollar value versus traveling or versus other things. So it's really hard to say, I think, how the next generation console is going to perform. I think, Sony did double their production. So they are expecting the demand to still remain high. And I think it's still kind of a little too early to say, depending on how big or how deep a potential the recession will end up impacting most consumers.
I think I kind of agree with you, Candice. I think something that we perceive within the research that we run in the European countries is like there is still room amongst the gamers just to still investing on the PS4, on the current generation consoles. And actually, as soon the COVID pandemic started, the big news were like the Switch is sold out, the Xbox One is still sold out. People are just taking this PS4 out of the store, and basically these devices are going to run out. And even 6 months down the line, we will have the latest generation in the market. So it's still some thirds amongst gamers just to get hold of these devices. So what is the future for the latest generation? I think if this engagement with the medium, which is video games, is still going up, I think it could be as easy as normal. People are still to be looking for entertainment. And I think we are very skeptical that the new normal will come back and travel and invest on traveling at the same rate that we used to, just because the virus is still there and we're still in lockdown, and the lockdown will go around the planet. So if people will look for other sources of entertainment, and video games is one of them, and is one that sticks the most, if not one of the stickiest, along with maybe video on demand, music, whatever. But I think it's very difficult to forecast that in terms of the overall behavior of the economy, recession, new devices, more content, more powerful devices. The only thing is like, it's encouraging just to see that in the middle of the economic downturn, video games actually succeed. It's a successful story. And not only in terms of money, but in terms of perception towards the video game industry. It's more positive at overall level.
I think we have to be realistic that we're going to be entering a very severe recession. I think the recession of 2021 is going to put the 2009 recession in the pale. Lots of people are going to lose their jobs, and people are just like you and me. If you lose your job, you have to prioritize where you're going to spend your money. I think we have to make a disconnect between the day one buyers who will go out and buy these consoles regardless of price, and those people who will get the console further down the line. And so the availability of Game Pass on the PC and the Xbox One has also complicated the issue, because Microsoft is doing itself a disservice. You don't need to buy an Xbox Series X to get Game Pass. So the situation is extremely complicated. When I did some research in regards to the last recession, there was a decline in regards to total video game spending. But this is quite a unique situation where we have a new generation being released at the same time we're entering a recession. I think for this period, 2020, I think it's going to be extremely healthy because of those day one buyers. But as we go into 2021, I think we have to be realistic that we are in the entertainment sector. And if you are running out of money, or you need to prioritize your money, we will be put on the back burner. And, rent and food comes first. So we have to recognize that there is a possibility we may experience a downturn in 2021.
Yeah, having said that, I definitely have some friends that would prioritize a PlayStation over rent. So, but yeah, no, I agree.
Yes, it's a gloomy topic, but I think, yes, it's a complicated one. And just like we depend on where the solutions for this virus and how the next 3 months and even the next tomorrow will pan out.
And I think that cloud gaming, again, will be accelerated because people are going to be faced with that choice. Do I spend $500 or $600 on a console, or do I spend, $10 on a Game Pass subscription just for this month to play the game that I want to play.
So let's talk actually a little bit about cloud gaming. I know that was something that a few of you were really interested in, especially, and talked about before in different capacities. With Microsoft announcing that its cloud streaming is going to be offered through Game Pass later this year, do you see that having an impact on how other companies that are touching into cloud gaming, or are you going to see an impact on Are you going to see that have an impact on their business models?
Yeah. So yes. In a number of different ways. So, I mean, publishers in general, how you monetize on a cloud or subscription service is different from how you monetize normally. And there's going to be this emphasis on active users and a reduced kind of like time to fun in a lot of ways. So if you now have a subscription service and you're a consumer and you have access to 250 games all at once and you can play them instantly, I mean, you can jump, the barrier to entry is very low, but the barrier to exit is also very low. So you can jump in, but also jump out. And publishers are going to have to think more about how to retain and a higher emphasis on retention and having those monthly active users. And I think it depends on the contract that they have with the subscription services, whether it's one-time upfront payment or whether they continue to monetize or they have, licensing fee based on the active users. But I think it's actually going to change also how the games are developed a little bit. Is similar to how we saw that with mobile games. Mobile games look very different to the other platforms because they monetize very differently. And similarly, how the subscription games monetize for the publishers, that'll also change how those games are developed and maybe making the content upfront more fun, or maybe making sure that like the entry experience is really engaging.
I also think that the console experience is still going to be part of the cloud gaming experience for the near future, at least. One, because of all the power you can pack into a console to help that occur, but also broadband has to be at a certain level for cloud gaming to avoid latency and those types of issues, which are pretty critical in video gameplay. So I think you're going to see some dual market pressures on each to see not who's going to win out, but how you reach consumers where they are and how they want to play. So I think the bet that at least what the console companies seem to be making when it relates to cloud gaming is we also want to make sure that we have a console experience to satisfy consumers. And as that experience deepens and as broadband and infrastructure actually enables faster and less latent play, you might see faster adoption. I think there's some great opportunities out there now, but I also think it'll be a dual market for a while.
Really interesting to hear everyone talk about this because, when we look at it, we're, Nico's looking at this, the sort of the future of cloud gaming in Asia. And the intersection that we're curious about is the way that this is going to affect mobile gaming. And, historically, the sort of the barrier to entry, or not the barrier to entry, but, the barrier there has been hardware capabilities. And so, what we see as the sort of the horizon mobile gaming in this region is really going to be a question of, making what would have kind of historically been a sort of a hardware demanding game or a kind of a core title that was only available to somebody who either had a high-end PC, was engaging in an internet cafe, or is one of the sort of the few console owners in the region. Now I think we're going to see a lot more accessibility to to these kind of titles. And so I think in the what we're thinking, at least in terms of Asia, is in the long run it's going to reduce the barrier to entry and and create a lot more potential consumers as the region kind of looks more favorably at buy-to-play models and and as spending around games increases. So it's it's definitely something that that's interesting to think about, especially as a sort of a tool to make mobile gaming more viable to sort of a core gaming experience.
Can I ask a follow-up to Alexander on that? Just because some of the regions like South Korea will have very fast broadband systems, and that may be true in other areas. And we probably in the U.S. have areas in urban centers that have great infrastructure, but then in some of our rural areas, it's tougher. Do you think because of the nature of broadband in those countries that helps accelerate it? I know the mobile market in South Korea and other areas in that region have been exploding for some time, well past where we are in the US. Do you think that's part of it? And do you think that extends to maybe other regions like Africa?
Oh, yeah, interesting. Yeah, absolutely. I think, there was, before the pandemic, virtually every country in the region had plans to roll out 5G within the year, within 2020. That's pushed a number of them back. But what we're seeing in China and sort of the rest of Southeast Asia kind of following suit is a real push to kind of get broadband infrastructure up to speed. And so, that would put the region kind of on par with South Korea. The thing is, it's going to be, in China, we talk about sort of like tier 1, tier 2 cities. And so, it's going to be urban centers. It's going to be kind of population centers where the internet speed is fast enough to support cloud gaming. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's the kind of the threshold. And what we're seeing in the region is a real push, kind of led by China, but picked up by sort of the neighboring countries to get infrastructure for sort of high-speed internet up to speed. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out, and sort of in light of the impacts and delays created by the pandemic. But
I think that's really fascinating. I think actually it depends now upon which region you are. I think if you're in the US and Western Europe, I think the consumers actually want a different thing from the Asian Pacific communities, or in Africa, where maybe ownership of consoles is more difficult to attain, but it's easier to actually have access to a subscription. I think in the West, Western Europe and the States, it really depends on what the consumer wants at the end of the day. Do we really want to live in the world where we have to have 10 different subscriptions in order to access our games? Or do we want to have a situation where we can still buy games and have 1 or 2 subscriptions like Game Pass or PlayStation Now? I mean, we keep on talking about cloud gaming as if it's something that's going to happen in the future. Well, we have it now. I mean, we have Game Pass, we've got PlayStation Now, we've got GeForce, NVIDIA GeForce, we've got Uplay Plus. Some of these services are getting more traction than others. And it really boils down to price and content. If you have the right price for the consumer and you've got the best content or a good quantity of content, you'll gain traction. So it really boils down as to what people want at the end of the day. And I personally, I don't think people want 10 different subscriptions. I think the maximum is probably 2 or 3. I mean, it's like in the TV sector, we've all got Netflix and we've got Amazon Prime. How many of those people want to get Disney Plus and Yahoo Plus and HBO Plus? The market's going to get smaller and smaller and smaller. So
yeah, but The Mandalorian was on Disney Plus, and then you had Game of Thrones on HBO. So
you were subscribed for 1 month, watch the whole thing, and then unsubscribe. So
no, but then something that we actually saw in Ipsos is like in the middle of COVID, like yes, Disney Plus was launched and it was very successful and actually managed like a really nice traction to the service, even when on household where Netflix and Amazon Prime and Sky Plus and all these services were available. So at the very end, it's just the content that is within these services, and is if the great games are available on these libraries. No, I mean, it's great to have like older games because people will always say like, I remember playing that game 10 years ago. I would just love to play that game again. And if it's there in the library, I can spend like a couple of dollars or pounds or euros or whatever per month. We'll get it, play for it, and then that's great. And I just got introduced to a 200 new games library. But also the new games will need to be there. So actually to have to push it even further to those people who wants to own the game, who wants to share the games with their friends. And just not to be socially distanced and like, okay, the new game is there, but then I just play in the previous game. And obviously, as you say, Sam, that will vary across the world. Like the first barrier is technology. If my broadband is not good enough, even in the US, even in the Western European countries, you will find places where the broadband service is poor. Then I will not enjoy the service. whatever it is, whatever it is, PlayStation Now, Xbox Game Pass. If I pay to Stadia, if I pay to Arcade, I cannot really play across devices the game if my broadband is not good enough. So the first barrier is technology. And as soon the broadband capacity is up to the level, then these services will start to be relevant. We just got, I mean, we've been tracking this format, this revenue stream for GameTrack since the very beginning. And it's no more than 3% of the gamers who are actually, they claim they are actually paying a subscription to the services. And at the moment, they are very around the console services just because the hardware is there. And that's pretty much owned by the Western countries, where gaming is owned by the console device. And it plays a very stronger view within the console environment. Asia, obviously, that's going to be like the console is not as strong. Then it's everything about technology and accessibility to the smart devices that they have.
Yeah, I think another interesting point, there's a lesson to be learned from the streaming industry, both, streaming subscription platforms, but also, what we're seeing around the sort of the proliferation of live streaming platforms in Asia is that, for the consumer and for the market, this is, there is an issue, I think, around just the sort of the multiplicity of choices, but, the competition that emerges from that, I think, is going to sort of to push the industry to, to develop sort of a standardization around pricing models that, will I think benefit consumers in the long term. I mean, we're seeing the battle around sort of live streaming platforms and the rights to, to media on there really kind of quickly getting the esports market to kind of figure out what these commodities are worth to a platform. So it'll be interesting to see how that competition plays out.
I mean, my final piece is that Google Stadia is on the market, and the amount of buzz that's coming from consumers in regards to the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X, and not so much for Google Stadia, is telling me that people still like the old-fashioned way of playing games.
It's the content, though. It's because Stadia doesn't really have compelling content. They only just figured out recently that they really need first-party content and to focus on that for their platform. And so you see like more and more titles coming out. But if they have something that's really, really compelling that you can only get on Stadia, that's super exciting, then I think people would be willing to go. They'll just go wherever the content is.
Yeah, I totally with you there, Katri. Like, Xbox realized that, and right now with the series, they're going to offer maybe the latest Halo there, and it's going to be like the big push towards the platform and the format. PlayStation is already know that the platform is the key, and that's why they're already kind of working at the studio just to produce games. So they have the full availability of whatever they want to do with that game, put it on the service or sell it as a pay-to-play game. Is down to them, but they can actually boost the library and the content within their library to drive users, players, consumers, just to subscribe for 10 euros, 10 pounds, $10 a month.
That was a fantastic discussion. Thank you all. That was wonderful. So this is, I'm sorry, I'm trying to get to whatever questions I can in the chat. We probably won't have time for all of these. But part of that discussion was talking about, broadband expansion and, being able to engage in services like cloud gaming and things in places that, do not have as strong a broadband infrastructure. And this is, I guess, somewhat related to that. It's less connected to broadband, but Arubeta TV is asking, in your opinion, will Microsoft, Sony, and Nintendo expand to markets like North Africa? We've seen more and more companies getting involved there, Riot Games, for example.
They should.
They should.
I think there's a lot of experimentation. Africa in many ways bypassed a lot of the other infrastructure to go to mobile and other technologies. And I know that there's a lot of interest, both because there's a market there and also because you have a host of new storytellers, a host of new developers who are coming up with new and interesting games that will appeal in that region and beyond. So I think you're going to see a lot of outreach, and I've seen a lot of outreach by a number of companies to try to tap into that market, because once you're able to try different means, whether it's console or cloud or mobile, it's a market that's eager. You saw it in film and television and how much has exploded from that region. And I think games is the next frontier, and a lot of opportunity to also help cultivate new developers, not just of games in terms of storytelling, but in terms of engineering. And so I think there are lots of reasons why they might want to be interested in that new region. And it'll be interesting to see how it impacts the new console, but also the future of cloud gaming.
I think it's a lot about data centers as well, and where those data centers exist, because I think the Middle East is a lot of times, the gamers, they actually have to get routed through like Asia or Germany or something. And that has a big impact on Middle East and North Africa gamers being able to be competitive, on the same level if you're playing a competitive game. But I think Microsoft has a data center there, and I think that more and more game publishers are looking at that more as a region where they want to serve. So that's going to be one of the main factors that drives further development in that region.
I think definitely we have received some queries about like publishers just trying to investigate like what is the state of the play on all these countries and across the continent, particularly like Middle East, like just to understand where the gamers are. Is it mobile? Is it PC? Is it console? They have seen such numbers in their sales, but they just want to understand it's across, is in which region. So definitely it would be a wonderful idea, future, you say, Stanley, just to understand the culture and just to basically just empower the culture to invade the video game ecosystem. That would be an amazing story.
I think it will come down to cost benefits analysis. They need to figure out where they can maximize their profits, because these systems are very expensive to produce. They certainly can't give it away for free. They can't. They can only cut the price by so much. And similarly for third-party publishers, they have value to their IP and to their content. And so if they are going to sell in regions which can afford less compared to Western Europe and North America, they have to make a risk as to whether or not, or how many units they can sell and what sort of money they can get back. So they have to do a risk cost benefit analysis to see whether or not they can expand to these markets. I think there's probably a better chance there of them expanding into the Asian markets and the Chinese markets. At the moment, Africa, it's still got some way to go in regards to generating the sort of revenues that they would like to invest in for the returns.
Natasha, Alex, did you want to add anything? Oh,
there we go. No, I mean, I totally agree with Sam. And I think, what we're looking at in terms of the sort of the growth around Asia is, this, it's kind of heading out in that direction. I think there's interest around the Middle East, but I think, where Asia connects there in terms of sort of like, India is a real sort of, I think that the next frontier for growth in the Asia region. And so, as we see Asia kind of expand out, I think it'll be India first, and then as the sort of the network stretches further out from there, it's gonna hit the Middle East and eventually get into North Africa. But yeah, I mean, it's as Sam said, it's going to be a cost benefit thing right now. I mean, we have extremely large audience of gamers in India, but the spend per player is pretty low there, and so like it's gonna those are gonna have to balance out before companies really start to invest energy in those markets.
All right, we had a question earlier from Matt M. Benson in the chat. Where does the group stand on future expectations and spending habits of the Roblox generation as they grow up? Could we see premium games as a model be under threat by their free-to-play experiences?
It's an interesting question, but no, I don't think so. And maybe that's. People will disagree, but I think, what we're seeing is a kind of a hybridization of models. And, what's really been hot in Asia recently has been a sort of a hybridization of the subscription and free-to-play model. So like battle passes and season passes and things like that. are implemented in a lot of free-to-play games. But we're also seeing a gradual uptick in buy-to-play, which is kind of, as I've said, counterintuitive when people think about the Asian market. It's been the real sort of really kind of driven by free-to-play models. I think of the success of League of Legends there, or the sort of the whole mobile ecosystem is really built around a free-to-play microtransaction model. And yet we're seeing an increase in Steam purchases and Steam engagement around around that platform in China. And so there's I think that market still exists. And I think it's kind of what we're seeing is those markets coming together.
I think that's a superb question. They're asking us what would be the pricing models and monetization in the next 30 years, because I have a 6-year-old son and he's completely obsessed with the game. But, is he willing to buy full price games when he becomes an adult? I don't know. It's a superb question. As adults, sometimes we begin to lose focus that young people are growing up with technologies and lifestyles that we are simply not used to. The whole free-to-play model, that everything is free, everything is licensed, everything is renting, nobody owns anything anymore. As people who all have mortgages and property, this kind of feels a bit weird that young people are saying, well, I don't need to own that. I don't need to own this. I'll just rent, or I'll get it for free and I'll pay microtransactions. So who knows, maybe in the future, that kind of monetization model will change the world, as microtransactions in the last 15 years have completely changed how third-party publishers are making most of their revenues. I mean, for example, the likes of EA and Ubisoft, half of their revenue is coming from microtransactions as opposed to full-price games. So that's a superb question, and as a 46-year-old man, I don't know.
Yeah, I'll just echo Sam here that in our revenue measurements, that the free-to-play share on PC and console has been growing continually at a fairly decent rate. So I do think that free-to-play, at least in the short term, is going to continue to be a dominant model, but that there will always be a place for premium content. There will always be a place for that, but whether or not the younger generation is going to be more unused to paying for games because they have grown up in a world where free-to-play is even more common than it is for us now. Yeah. We'll have to ask your 6-year-old son.
Does anyone else have anything they wanted to add?
It's something that we have seen within the kind of game track market, like the progression of this free-to-play, and this pretty much is being embraced by app gaming and smart devices. Like you can download 10 apps in a week, you play 2, you delete 7 by the end of the week, and you embrace it. And then if you really engage with that game, that really you play going on your bus, you're playing before going to bed on that device, at some point you will find something that's like, okay, for the next level, just you need to invest less than $1, less than £1, less than €1. And then you're like, okay, I just do it. And then it's being just embraced. And right now it's the nature, and right now it has bad PC games, and right now it's embedding, is progressively growing within the system. Right now, it's actually kind of driving. I need to look at the estimate that around 50% of the overall revenue as app gaming just happens. It's just mainly driven by microtransactions. Consoles is just taking over in terms of gaming time, but people are still first to own the game. The future, maybe it will take a really relevant part as app gaming will continue and embrace it, but as people are still just looking to own that game and be eager to pay for the collection. So it's about discovering the pockets of gamers that are looking for the relevant format on the right device.
Yeah, and just to follow up on that, you need great content, right? If you have great content, that's what's pulling people in. So if you have great content, people are willing to experiment more. And if they know what they're going to get and like it, they're willing to experiment more. If they're not sure, that's where this interplay really happens.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Content drives everything.
Yes, I agree with you. I think that if you have great content, people there, where you will always have gamers who will be willing to buy your game. Content is everything.
I mean,